Hey everybody, welcome to another meeting of the Research Triangle PowerShell User Group. My name is Mike Kanakis, and on behalf of my co-hosts Phil Bossman and Kevin Locks, we'd like to welcome you all here this evening. Tonight, we are proud to have a guest speaker, Lars Rasmussen, who's going to be talking about optimizing different workloads in databases using DBA tools. Before we get started, we'd just like to remind everybody that this is a live user group that you're watching. If you're joining us on YouTube, there are actually people in the room and people online that are going to be asking questions. And so Lars has a presentation he'd like to do tonight, but we like to consider these interactive demos. And so we may not end up in the destination that we planned when we started, and please keep that in mind. But we hope you enjoy the demo tonight. And turn it on over to Lars.
Thank you.
All right.
My screen visible?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, as far as questions during the presentation, if you could just put them in chat, and Mike or Phil will kind of act as a moderator and verbally relay those questions to me. Feel free to gently interrupt whenever you want. Here's a little bit about me. I started using PowerShell back when it was in beta, and I got really excited about it. And I'm like, oh, this feels like Bash. And I was on an operations team at that time where you had to sign off and, oh, here's a daily task, here's a weekly task, here's a monthly task, etc. And yet it's a lot of repetitive tasks, and being able to learn how to use PowerShell to automate some of that was a lot of fun. And yeah, that's really enough about me. Now, as far as what we're going to be talking about tonight, we will be touching on DBA tools, as Mike mentioned previously. Also, we're going to be talking about serial execution versus parallel execution. So if I was to think of like an analogy for that, and you're not familiar with what that means, you could think of like a two-lane highway versus a freeway. You know, a two-lane highway, if there's construction, then you have to sometimes stop one lane of traffic completely, and traffic can only flow one way in one lane, and then they switch off the flag and switch off and then let traffic go through the other way. So things are very constricted in that kind of serial mode of thinking versus parallel, where you've got a freeway that's divided and it's got multiple lanes on each side of the freeway. A lot more traffic can flow through. So that's the kind of same thing we're going to be talking about tonight. And I'm going to be pretty fast and loose with terms like run spaces, jobs, and threads. And so if you're really knowledgeable about run spaces, for example, already, this may not be the talk that you're looking for. This is more focused on, for me, operational tasks and how I can leverage multiple threads or multiple run spaces to run those tasks at scale.
Hey, Lars.
Yeah.
Got an interesting question right off the bat.
Yep.
So Ryan's wondering, the parallel stuff that you're discussing, is it even possible to do that if your database has parallel execution disabled?
So the answer is yes, because the context that I'm talking about is when you have multiple database servers. Okay, so I'm going to create multiple containers tonight as part of the demo. And so you'll see that we're operating against multiple database servers in parallel.
So we're not looking to optimize the work that's happening within a database itself by trying to be more efficient. We're talking about how to do multiple threads against multiple databases and not have to wait for each one to execute before the next one starts.
Correct. I'm an operational DBA, so it's important to me to be able to do things against multiple things, if that makes sense, multiple servers. And even though we have a lot of infrastructure as code at my shop, I've found that there are a lot of holes.
Mhm.
We can build the servers and the clusters up to a certain point, and then there's still some manual stuff and tweaking that has to be done after that, because that manual stuff and tweaking hasn't been checked into the infrastructure as code repository yet. So that's some of the stuff that I have to deal with. Or do you want to look at configurations of multiple servers and compare them? How many cores do I have on that one? How much memory do I have allocated on that one? And to the point of the earlier question, what's my max DOP setting? How many concurrent schedulers can run against a specific query? So looking at those types of settings. Did that answer the question, I hope?
He's got a follow-up. It just asked, so let's see.
Yep, let's hear it. I'll go back
Ryan,
to the Legos here.
Ryan, I think in your case, this probably isn't relevant to what you're asking, Ryan. He's asking, what if you only have one database? And I think the answer here is, well, you're trying to do work on multiple databases at the same time.
Yeah.
So this probably is not relevant to the single database question.
So it could be. You could use these techniques to perform multiple operations like log restores or backups, for example, on one database server in parallel. Okay, and so that kind of bumps up against something that I wanted to address anyway. So I'm glad the question was asked. One of the considerations that you're going to have when you start moving from a sequential or a serial way of thinking and working to a parallel one is that you have to think about things that are bottlenecks or could be bottlenecks. So throughput, storage throughput, for example, CPU, memory usage. If I tell the server to go ahead and restore 5 backups at the same time, and each one of those backups is a terabyte, that's going to take some resources. Now, the server might be big enough to handle that, but what else is going on at the same time? Does it need to be serving up requests at the same time? So just some of the things that you want to think about in that type of scenario.
So it sounds like you need to do some scoping work to understand what, like you said, potential roadblocks that you could hit, right? So it's not just throw it all at the wall and then take it down because I didn't realize I just maxed everything out.
Yeah, like everything in IT, it depends, right? Additional questions?
No, we're good.
Okay. So this is going to be some of the things that we're looking at, and some of the things that we're not going to look at tonight, but that I use these techniques for. And even though I'm going to be talking a lot about SQL Server and DBA tools as far as executing tasks in parallel, you can use this same kind of pattern to execute tasks in parallel against anything. So, and that includes older versions of PowerShell. So what I'm going to be showing you, most of it, not all of it, most of it will work on PowerShell 3 and up. Some of it may even work on PowerShell 2 and up. So if you've got some servers that can't be updated, or just for whatever reason, you're using these older versions of PowerShell 5.1, 3.0, any of those older versions, these techniques will work for you still. So we went from scattered Legos, these are my kids' Legos, by the way, or were, to semi-organized Legos.
Much better than mine.
Okay. So PowerShell does have a flight recorder. It has several. We're going to talk about 2 of them tonight, 2 of the easier ones to deal with. These 2 right here, start transcript and get history. So let me go ahead and jump to the terminal. And we're going to start a transcript. And when I say start a transcript, again, you can think of it as that black box, that flight recorder that shows the commands that I've typed. It'll also show at the header of the file, if you will. It'll show some information about the machine, that the transcript was running on, and will also show the output of the commands to a certain extent. Not all the output, but you'll get some of it.
Right. Go home. Go home.
So I'm just going to define a path and start that transcript.
I just sent Raider home. Mute yourself.
So the other command here is this get history. So get history by default is specific only to the current session versus like the PS read line history, which you can use to look at all of the command line history for a given user on a machine. So if I type get history here, just expand that, you can see some of the command line right there, the things that I've been typing. And the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and create some containers. So I've gone ahead and I've already deleted those containers. I'm going to show you the script briefly that I'm using to create these containers. Let's close this terminal. Okay. So I stored a credential using the Windows Data Protection API, using the Better Credentials module, which is not the best way to store credentials, but it does use the DBA API. So it does have a certain amount of security. It's the same thing that the credential manager in Windows uses. And then I'm building some strings, and then however many containers were passed to the parameter, I'm going to go ahead and create those SQL servers. And the easiest way to do that is using the Go version of SQL CMD. Apparently Go is some programming language I'm not familiar with. There's the previous version of SQL CMD was an executable that had certain functionalities for like running queries. The Go version of SQL CMD lets you do a few other things like create containers very quickly. So that's what we're doing here. And Docker is going to be used with these. I should probably turn on the word wrap here. And all of this will be already is in the GitHub repo. So we're going to create 4 containers, and those are done. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is just compare some basic object creation, and I stole this from somebody else. I can't remember who right now, but let's go to serial. Here. The first time I did this demo, I did it all from the command line, as opposed to running these script files. And I just copied and pasted them because most of the work that I do is in PowerShell is at the command line in the console. And so I use Control R a lot to search through the PS read line history. But you can see that we've got a few different ways of creating the jobs here. I've got RS jobs and PS jobs here. And these objects, it's just each one of them is just creating 5 objects and then measuring how long it took to create those objects. So the RS jobs, 2.35 seconds, PS jobs, 4.864 seconds. Now, when I say RS jobs, this is part of Boprox's posh RS job module. And that's what we're going to be looking at a lot tonight. Now, there is another way in newer versions of PowerShell, instead of just using jobs, you can use for each parallel. So we'll do the same test with for each parallel. So that was 0.3155. So if I scroll back, you can see that these other techniques I'm not seeing them on the scroll back anymore, but they were slower. I'll run it one more time. So it was like 0.3 something versus 0.29 versus 4.93. So the RS jobs won, but just barely. And so again, it depends. There are going to be different considerations for each one of these methods. And if you want, and I'm talking about jobs here, because PowerShell does have the concept of jobs. And so if I type get job, we can see these jobs that ran, and then another one that's currently running. And to find information about those jobs, you can get one of those jobs and receive the job. So there's the output from that job. Again, when you're running things in parallel, a lot of stuff's happening in the background. How do you keep track of that? How do you debug it? This is one of the ways to do that. Questions? Good. Okay. So for this next task, this is just going to be a serial task.
Lars, I do have a question.
Yeah, Mark.
The time that you got, the sub-second time that you got in your for each parallel, was that the time to completion of the last job, or is that the time of submission of all of the jobs? Because
it was the total time of completion for all of the objects being created.
So the jobs had run to completion, not just been submitted.
Correct.
Okay.
Now I didn't have any error checking, Mark. So to your point, if something had, all I was doing was measure command against what I ran. So, if something had gone wrong, it would not have accounted for that. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Thanks.
Yeah, so that's the simplest example that we're going to look at is object creation. Now we're going to look at something a little more practical. When SQL Server starts up, it creates a log, and the file that's currently being logged is just called error log. And we're going to look at each one of these four logs. So each one of these four SQL servers, these four instances, if you will. If I say instance in SQL Server, same thing in this case. You can have a collection of binaries is an instance in SQL Server world that runs the services for SQL Server. And you can have multiple instances on a single server if you really like to live dangerously. Most of the time you don't do that. Each server has one instance of SQL Server running on it. So we're going to look at all of the error logs, all the logs for SQL Server, and just look for a single string. And I'll open up that script real quick. Okay, so we're establishing some parameters here that we're going to splat. And this is a for each loop because this is a sequential operation or a serial operation. We're going to go ahead. We already have a variable right here that exists that we're going to assign to another variable. So it's just an array of the server names. So if you want to look at that real quick. That's what that is. And then this is the text that we're searching for. The word build is the string we're looking for. And then we're going to spit that out. I have some other things going on here because I found that this is something that's handy for me to use when I'm looking for lots of different entries in an error log, or I might want to consider looking at unique entries. Okay, so if you look to the right, this command's executing right now, and this is all on my laptop. So this laptop is not a beefy laptop. It's only got 16 gigs of RAM. So we are pushing it a bit. And you can see on the right-hand side how long the commands have taken to execute previously. And this one, still going. So it's right here. Oh, it came back. So 33 seconds, that's a long time to retrieve the build version of SQL Server from an error log. So let's try this another way. Let's try it in parallel. Okay. First thing is we're clearing out any of the existing jobs. We're going to establish how many run spaces we're going to create. And that's wrapped up for us by this PoshRS job module. So a lot of the naming conventions for the functions in this module are similar to the functions that you use to manage jobs natively in PowerShell. And this brings us to this line 10 here. This is kind of important. Because I am using run spaces, this separate thread, if you will, every run space is like its own PowerShell session. So I have to pass which modules I want to load into that run space. And I have to consider how long it's going to take to load those modules. If something is really time sensitive, I may not want to load a module to use that functionality. I may want to write my own function and use that and pass that in to the run space. The DBATools module is ginormous. It's got well over 300 functions, and that's not going to be a small thing to load. And I'm loading two modules here, Better Credentials and DBATools. And then I'm setting some default parameters so that my credentials get passed to whatever command I'm passing that matches these patterns of parameter names and function names. Still looking for the same string right here on line 24. And the idea here on line 28 is to show how each run space is progressing. Because what we've done right here on line 10 is passed an input object to start RS job. And that input object is going to be split up, if you will. There's a better word for that I can't think of right now. Maybe iterated. Help me out, chat. Against the number of threads that you have. So right now I've got 4 and 4, right? I've got 4 instances and I've got 4 threads that I'm going to run in parallel, or 4 run spaces that I'm going to run in parallel. However, you might have 100 or 1,000 servers that you're passing in as an input object. Another thing that I've done with the input object is passed in an Excel spreadsheet that had some server names in it, had some database names in it, and that's what I used within the loop for the run spaces. So again, it depends. If you're passing in 1,100 databases that are on 11 servers, how many threads do you want to run? How many run spaces do you want to have? You can have lots and lots, but you have to think about where you're running this. And when I say where you're running it, all of this is coming together. All of these run spaces are being run from your machine that's running PowerShell. So even though you're performing operations against several different remote machines, for example, you got to think about how many threads you can run on your local machine, how much memory it's going to use, that type of thing. So if you're doing a lot of work, you might need to have a beefy machine to do some of this. PowerShell is not light on memory usage, in my experience. Questions?
I'm interested to know, there's a lot of thought that went into this, right? And so it's very well thought out, and you're considering a lot of things. My assumption is there's a lot of trial and error that it took to figure out how to get this process right. You probably went through a lot of iterations of like, oh, I didn't consider that. Oh, I didn't consider that. Let's figure out how to deal with that. And so was it a long process to sort of build this greatest hits of the best ways you should sort of do things?
I've been using this for so long, Mike, I can't remember how long it took.
Sure.
What happened was that I stumbled initially for however long that took. And once I figured out how to get around a few problems, like credentials when I'm not on a domain, when I'm having to pass SQL credentials, for example, and how to load the modules that I just talked about, I just reuse this over and over and over again. And all I'm doing is changing function names and parameters that I'm splatting. So that was most of it for me. And as far as, it kind of brings up a point as far as troubleshooting and debugging. So if you're running into problems, it might make sense to try to run without parallel stuff, without POSH-RS jobs or for each parallel. Just try to run sequentially initially. See if your loop's working sequentially, or scale it down. Maybe just run a basic command to verify that you're at least connecting to the server, and kind of a hello world type of thing, and then build on that. Then take it to a place where you're doing it in parallel. You can also, once you do it in parallel, just run one thread the first time, and then troubleshoot that, run it with minus verbose, and then that will help you in your troubleshooting there. Hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I was essentially thinking about the part where you were talking about figuring out bandwidth for storage, and that just seems like that's just a lot of war wounds learned, and you figure out, that unfortunately it feels like a lot of trial and error and a lot of
one of the
mistakes to get to a point where you're like, I know exactly how I do this now.
So this is, I guess, confessions of a DBA, confessions of an operational DBA. I don't think I pushed the servers hard enough. Okay. It is pretty so. Even though I know how to do these parallel tasks, there are some processes I have that are still sequential. That probably shouldn't be, because the server can do more. They can do a lot more. And so does it make sense to continue to leave those processes that way just because they're that way now? Or is the juice going to be worth the squeeze, as it were, to go in and take a look at that and say, hey, I can run, I can have 2 index maintenance jobs, 2 backup jobs running at the same time, and then meet in the middle. They're creating a queue and running against all the databases, but they might be in alphabetical order, or are sorted by size of the database, and one job starts at one end and another job starts at the other end and meets in the middle.
This is like what I tell my coworkers, that like your code's never done, right? There's always, can I optimize it? Did I think about doing it from this angle? What about in this situation? And so, but you're just sort of reiterating what I know, which is it's an evolution that could essentially never end. There's always an optimization to possibly consider.
Absolutely. And then once you're really happy with something and you've become a legend in your own mind, just go ahead and spit that into Chat GPT and eat some humble pie when you ask it how to improve what you just did there. All right. So this is the parallel. We're going to go ahead and run this in parallel. Instead of 33 seconds, we're hoping this is going to be a little faster. There is a significant amount of overhead to passing these modules, to loading these modules in the run spaces for each thread. So you can see the remaining jobs that came up there real quick. And then I spit this out to grid view as well. So that was some work that the other one didn't do. But that took 12 seconds as opposed, or 12.6 seconds as opposed to 33.1 seconds. And it's returning the same information, running same commands. Again, serial versus parallel, sequential versus parallel. Okay, so for the next one, we're going to look at a different operation. So right now, these SQL servers, these instances, they don't have any databases on them.
So we have a few questions when you get to a natural break here.
That's not strictly true. They have system databases. Okay, so they are there, they're running. What question you have?
So there's a few questions in the chat, nothing crazy, but Ryan, who was asking some of the earlier questions, is curious about essentially how you're connecting to the service. He's referring to how you're remoting into the service. I think what he really means is how are the jobs being connected? Service is
Okay.
jobs work on remoting? Bill, dude, that's not true. That's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have to have remoting in place to be able to use jobs? I thought jobs work without remoting enabled.
Jobs is the local jobs. What are you doing within the job itself?
Yeah, so that's why I think Ryan made, because you're not actually remoting to any servers.
Not tonight.
Right.
I'm not using WinRM or SSH.
In this particular case, he's connecting to local.
Yeah.
but
So
there's a
Ryan, just to
wide
clarify, he's got containers he spun up on his local machine and he's interacting with those containers. But so there's no remote connections.
It's remote, but it's within the local net.
Yeah, I agree. That's connection.
Yeah, they are their own containers.
Right.
But you're reaching out to SQL DO1. You could ping SQL 01. You could
Yes.
ping SQL 02.
Yes.
Yeah, those are remote machines effectively. So the DBA, get DBA, and all it's talking to a remote machine, but it's not remoting and PowerShell remoting in that,
Right.
In that function.
So I guess that brings a point up, like what would need to be in place if these were remote containers or remote servers?
It'd be the same thing. So as far as what I'm showing tonight, it wouldn't matter. I even thought about doing this demo using some cloud resources, and I'd be using the same techniques. So you just need to be able to access the port in this case that SQL Server is running on. So I started at port 1401 and there's port 1402, 3, and 4. Additional questions?
No, because I don't understand them. It's about module exporting, and I don't want to go down that path. Well, maybe we'll come back to it later.
Okay. So we're instead of just these system databases that are on there, There's actually more databases than that, but I'm not going to show them right now. We're going to restore some user databases. And while that's running, did I do the wrong one? I did the wrong one. There we go. That's what I want. Control C. So there's 1 server, 2 server, 3 server, 4 servers. So 9.7 seconds. Now let's try it in parallel. Oop, I have to kill them first. My bad. Need to drop those databases. Drop them in parallel. And I added verbosity to that so you can see kind of what that looks like when you're using the Posh RSCHOP module. Now let's go ahead and run that restore. Okay. So that took 8.9 seconds. So really not that big a difference in this particular test. However, if you had to do this with 100 databases and you had run spaces, the biggest overhead is at the beginning when the run space is being created and the modules are being loaded into that run space. Once that one run space has been created, it's going to be reused and reused and reused according to the amount of input objects that you're passing in. So if you've got 4 run spaces and you've got 100 objects, maybe I'm going to say, actually, I want to have 25 run spaces, and that's going to get you there a lot faster. Questions? Okay, now we're going to do some dangerous stuff. We were looking in the log earlier just for the string build to show us the build of SQL Server. Now we're going to add a bunch of very dangerous things to SQL Server. Do not do this in production ever, because if you raise some of these errors at these severities, SQL Server will terminate connections and worse, potentially. So that's why I'm going to have to run this several times, and you'll see errors while I run it. Because it's going to kill these SPIDs, these queries, as they're on it. But that should be enough to give us some interesting information in the error log. So there's an individual that's big in the SQL community named Eric Darling, and he wrote this great stored procedure called SP Log Hunter. And looking at the SQL Server error log can be kind of tedious. He takes out the quote interesting bits and presents those to you. Now you can pass parameters to the stored procedure that give you a lot more granularity as far as what you want to return. But by default, it returns some pretty valuable information. This has been pretty well thought out as it was written, and so it can prevent you from having to just scroll and scroll and scroll through the log to find something that is of potential importance. So let's go ahead and run that in serial. While it's doing that, I'm going to bring up that script that's running it in serial. So all it's doing is running this SQL command right here that I have highlighted on line 6, and it's doing it in a for each loop. And I am adding each result set from running that query to the results array, and I'm spitting that out to grid view. So if we jump back here, it's on the 4th one. Wait for it. There we go. So we can see now, what is happening on these servers that we're concerned with. Well, that stretch code generator output's corrupted. That might not be a good thing. Got some other things here, possible database corruption, some other fun things about remote storage, column storage, data checksum mismatch. That can't be good. But the point is that we just went through all 4 servers, and instead of returning the whole error log, we've looked at things that are of interest potentially. So we'll go ahead and run that again in parallel. You can see a pattern here. So that one took over a minute and 2 seconds to run that. And it looks like it's already finished 2 of them, and boom. So we got 27 seconds instead of a minute and 2 seconds. And this is just with 4 servers as the input object. So you can imagine, again, as you add more run spaces, and you have more servers that you're dealing with, your gains are just potentially going to increase. So you'll be able to do more and more compared to trying to do that in a serial, in a sequential loop. Same results, right? Now they are ordered slightly different. But again, parallel, faster in this case. Parallel is not always faster. Some things just don't make sense to do in parallel. Not just initial testing, but sometimes it makes sense to just go ahead and run a simple for each loop and leave it at that. Okay. So for this last little demo here, we're wrapping up. And before I run this, we have any additional questions in chat?
Hey, Lars, this is Ryan again from earlier. Curious, with your thread jobs, have you found, a rough estimate on how much, memory may need to be used for each job, or, at a base level? So you kind of give a good baseline as to how many potential, threads you may get a chance to spin up, if that makes sense. I'm sorry, I'm trying to explain it right.
I haven't really dug into it to find out what those precise numbers are, but I will tell you that, like, I'm the guy on the jump box who is like hogging memory. Like, my my PowerShell session has like, it might have 12 gigs of memory, you know, that it's using. So I'm that guy. So yeah, it is not inconsequential. It is there's a significant amount of memory that's being consumed, and that'd be a great thing to test.
Okay.
Okay, so those errors that we saw, we're going to go ahead and use start RS job again. And this time we're going to gather specific errors. We're going to say, hey, whenever this particular error occurred in the event log, I want you to return that as part of the result set, this error 50,000. And we're going to gather those results, get a count, and we're going to do some sorting on them too. Don't have to do that. I'm just doing it in this case. Oh yeah, this line 35, I do this all the time. This might seem kind of weird, but I love outputting ISO 8601 timestamps. I think it's ISO 8601. I was thinking of that XKCD comic. Just for like when I'm taking screenshots. So I'll just spit this out. I even have a function, you know, to do these. Like I think I called it TS, so that every once in a while I can put one of these there, and I can see, you know, what what time it was when I ran a specific command, like before and after. Because not all of my servers have a prompt that shows how long something took to run. Most of them don't. Okay, so we're going to get those results, and then we're going to build a string that creates a file, and we're going to spit those results into Excel. So we're going to use Doug Fink's import Excel module and pass it some parameters, splat these parameters, and then go ahead and eventually export the Excel file. This line here on line 66 is, there's a format that SQL Server uses for timestamps. And so you always end up having to do some custom formatting for those columns in Excel. So that's what that's doing there. So let's go ahead and run that. So it's doing something very similar to what we did before as far as gathering those result sets. Only this time I added some verbosity and we're spitting it out to a file. So there's the file name right there. And I think I assigned that to a variable. Yep. So let's just go ahead and invoke that item. That's an alias for invoke-item that I use a lot. Aliases are not evil. Okay.
They're your friend.
Yes, and they save keystrokes. They make you faster. Okay, so here's our errors. We can scroll through these errors and you can see that there were different processes or SPIDs, you know, that had those errors occurring on them on different servers in column A. And if we want to see which errors occurred on which servers, then we can do that. And again, it's really handy when you're looking at lots of servers and you have a specific error that you're looking for. You know, whether you're looking at a SQL Server error log, or you're looking at a Windows cluster log, or you're looking at the Windows system log, you're probably going to be looking at several servers for the same thing often. This way, you're just getting counts. You have a quick visual representation of how many errors occurred on which server. And I find that very, very useful. You can gather it very quickly using these patterns, running it in parallel, using the import Excel module, and look like a superhero. Like, how did you do that? all this code is available on the GitHub repo. Questions?
I think we're good.
Okay. So here is the repo. There are two demos in there. One of them has to do with availability groups, and another one is the Parallel DBA Tasks from the command line that we did tonight together. And then this second item here, this is my gists. Again, most of the scripts, most of the PowerShell that I write happens in the console for me. I'm very operational that way. And so it's pretty common for me to just write something small, save that off somewhere, push Control R, well, save it in a gist. But since I've already got it in my command line history, my PS read line history, I push Control R. I type a few unique characters to find that, and then tweak it if I need to, and run it. So over the years, I've got a lot of these that I haven't shared that have company information in them, server names, that type of thing, which I haven't, which I haven't sanitized yet. But I've got a lot that I can. That's not intellectual property. So if you look at the gists, you'll find some of those. There's some nuggets in there that I've found very useful. Everything from testing storage throughput to running Microsoft technical support tools on a server core box to gather information for support for a support ticket. So, or something even simpler, hey, I want to look at all of the commands that have been run as this user on this machine, and give those to me in the clipboard, or all of the PS read line history, all of the commands for all of the users on this machine, things like that. Questions?
Good job.
We already talked about some of the caveats. Again, think about where your bottlenecks could potentially be, and try to figure things out in a simple way first, in a sequential way before you go parallel with them. And when you do start going parallel, maybe just spin up one run space initially, just to test things out and add some verbosity to your script. Yeah, so security and permissions. Security is something that we talked about a little bit earlier, but you got to keep in mind that each run space is its own clean environment. The only thing that's going to be in there is what you add to it. So that may not be enough to perform the task needed. You might need it. You might need that run space to communicate with a secrets manager, or store. What's the word for that, Mike?
The secret manager module uses the secret store. So you had them both.
Okay, thank you. And that is it.
Good job.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we covered all the questions in the chat. Yep. There was some discussion about exporting modules, exporting stuff from the modules. I actually didn't mention that because I didn't pick that up where you had that in your code. Some of the guys were asking. There's a question here about. Yeah, maybe we'll just let you read the chat on your own. But all right, so Lars, great job tonight. That was a really interesting demo. If you're joining us at home and you're interested in what you saw tonight, our group features PowerShell content at all our meetings. PowerShell is utility, and we feature different ways to use that utility to help get your job done better, quicker, faster. Again, if you're watching at home, please check out our YouTube channel. We've got over 150 videos on various topics covering all aspects of PowerShell. And we'd like to say thank you to Lars for sharing some information with us tonight. Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you at the next one.